Hello everyone, my name is Rupinder Judge and I'm a Maths SLE and a Maths teacher at Chiltern Learning Trust. I teach 4 days in a middle school and on the 5th day I work across the trust schools in terms of supporting the teaching and learning and especially teaching and learning of maths. I have 16 years of teaching experience in a range of schools, primary, middles and secondary. I absolutely love my role and I think I'm in a very privileged position to work across a range of school and see good practice and learn from the professionals. Today I'm going to present a talk on transition and I'm going to focus on maths transition especially. So let's have a look at the transition to begin with. Change is perhaps the only constant we have in our lives. So as educators, it is essential that we are supporting our students to handle changes effectively. Transition from primary to secondary school is a really important part of a student's journey, and we can make this journey very smooth and seamless by focusing on each aspect of the transition carefully. We have many changes to consider here from one phase of education to another, and if we thought carefully, we can make the unfamiliar familiar for our pupils systematically. In order to really make our students' education system even stronger, we need to ensure that we are making solid connections between two disparate systems. Consistency is very important when they are moving from a primary school to secondary school. And these arrangements go beyond our already embedded immediate transitions between June and October. The solid connections need to be built on the curriculum transition as well. And I think a successful transition has a combination of factors. And there are two important factors of successful transition. And one of them is pastoral, and the second one is curricular. So we look at the pastoral transitioning, and from my experience, many schools have got this right in very, very good way. They arrange open evenings which are structured to showcase their schools and the good practices. Heads of department and heads of years go and visit primary schools. There is a really good exchange of information between SENCOs, primary and secondary, so the teacher are able to identify who needs help and where we can consult outside agencies, etc. So all the information is then passed on to the schools. During COVID, I'm aware that people and many school staff have used virtual videos to have virtual tour of the department, tour of the school, and many schools have planned staggered openings at the beginning of the next academic year. And there are structured transition days, and some schools have done a structured transition using remote learning as well. So we are way ahead in terms of pastoral transitioning. However, when it comes to curriculum transitioning, from my teaching experience over the 16 years, I think this is an area where we need to work collaboratively with a range of schools. Curricular transitioning could be, for example, cross-phase teaching, Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3. And in some schools, it happens very effectively. There could be really good transition projects in place. And in some schools, again, this happens really nicely, collaboratively. There are pride pieces which are being shared among feeder primary and secondaries. There is a shared language between really good curricular transitioning systems. However, one area where I think this practice is not so strong as, or I haven't seen a really good practice, is standardization that spans from early years to Key Stage 5. And I think this is an area where, as professionals, we can work together and we can come to some of the solutions. So maths transition becomes really easy along with the curricular, along with the pastoral transitioning. So when I was putting together this PowerPoint, I came across this. And I read this a while back. This is on NCETM community forum, and that's where teachers share their understanding and they ask different questions. So I really like this. It said, we have run a transition unit for pupils moving from primary to secondary schools for the past few years. However, some of the primaries feel that it is outdated. They would like something more interactive and hands-on. So we have a problem here. The problem is that some pupils who came to our schools, but not from one of our partner primaries, therefore we need something that is accessible to pupils at the start of year 7 who have not undertaken the first part of the transition. Any ideas welcome. I will post this on the primary forum. And this problem was posed on 2009. And actually, working across a range of schools, I think this is still a problem for quite a few of our schools. So what can we do? What kind of questions do we need to ask ourselves? I'm going to be asking you a series of questions, and I would like you to very honestly reflect on those questions and give yourself a score at the end of those questions. Where do you think you are, if you are in a primary school, if you are in a secondary school, or if you are in a trust? Have you ever planned jointly with your feeder schools? And have you ever planned and amended your curriculum area with your feeder schools? How often do you teach in your feeder school or in lower school? How often do lower school staff go to the secondary school and teach there? Do you have a lead link for literacy and numeracy across the school? Or do you have a lead link for teaching across the school? Are your staff aware of the Key Stage 2 curriculum if they are in a secondary school? What measures have you put in place to make your staff aware of the progression from primary to secondary in your curriculum area? Have you tried to establish cross-curricular links across trust or with your feeder schools? These are really important questions, and I would like you to have a minute or so, think carefully which of the practices you do really well in your trust, in your schools, and where you think you can improve. And then you give yourself a score out of 7. If your score is 7 out of 7, it is incredibly impressive. That means there is outstanding practice going on in your trust. However, from my teaching experience, I have not seen all of these 7 elements present consistently. So let's look at an example. Have a read of the following statutory requirements and guess what school year they refer to. And then I will give you the answers at the bottom of the screen. Know and use the vocabulary of prime numbers, prime factors, and composite non-prime numbers. Generate and describe linear number sequences. Compare and classify geometric shapes, including quadrilaterals and triangles based on their properties and sizes. Add and subtract fractions with the same denominator within one. Now, if you are a primary practitioner, have you seen that in your schemes of work? If you are a secondary practitioner, have you seen this in your scheme of work in a secondary school? You probably are not surprised. Are you surprised? Because when I first started teaching in a secondary school, I was actually really surprised. A quick calculation suggested that around 80% of the content that we are teaching students in their first 2 years of at high school or secondary school had already been encountered at primary schools. Children may not retain all the information, but they definitely have been taught this. So my experience of visiting and teaching in a range of schools suggested that the style and the content of our existing schemes of learning was actually very common. So, is it any wonder there is a national dip in pupils or in students' mathematical performance in 7 and 8? The data shows there is a dip. Why is there a dip? This is what we should be asking ourselves. Collaboration is the key. So what have I noticed from my experiences? When feeder schools, whether they are primary or lower, work collaboratively with their secondary school and they go and observe practice in each other's schools, it can have a significant and positive impact on their mathematical ability, development, and enjoyment of the subject, especially for pupils. And I notice in primary schools, more talking in lesson promotes thinking from different perspectives. And that's something that probably in some of the secondary schools we don't do very effectively, and some of the primaries may not do it effectively either. People are very creative in primary schools, and they are talking about maths lessons using STEM sentences in a way that they usually sometimes reserve for English, humanities, and geography, these lessons. Retrieval practice is built into lessons really, really well, and this practice does happen in secondary schools as well. Pupils felt the lessons feel different, and they are different because they are highly engaging, there is a variety there, and they like it. Engagement. This has improved pupils' engagement as well because the style is varied and they are taking a thorough approach because of having the flexibility in primary schools. And there's a buzz that was perhaps not there before. So mastery approaches have actually really helped pupils to think deeply about maths curriculum. And it was also noticed that behavior in lessons, as monitored by recorded incidents on Sims, has never been better. So primary schools do have really good practice in place. However, being a secondary teachers, we often don't get a chance to go into a primary school, so we are sometimes not as fully aware as we can be. So what can we do? And what can we change? How about instead of year 6 students coming into our school for taster lessons, we send our year 7 teachers into our feeder primary schools to observe what maths at year 6 was really like. I worked in a primary school last term and they were absolutely keen to actually come and visit another middle school and secondary school because they thought it doesn't really happen often. This is a really good example when we can collaborate more and learn from each other. We can take it even further by planning a lesson collaboratively. So we are delivering it in a primary and in a secondary school setting. So we are building those links. So children are seeing us. And a really good practice would be where we are going perhaps once a term to teach and deliver and plan collaboratively. And if we are really ambitious and if we are really organised, we could have this practice built into our school calendar every half term. Becoming familiar with pedagogy is really important in order to take pupils onto the next step of their learning journey, how pupils are taught, and the impressive style that the content is delivered. We all learn from each other. And none of us are finished product. I certainly am not. So I think we should learn more when we watch others and when we collaborate with others. So this way we will be able to make this transition very smooth. How about doing a Key Stage 2 pass paper within your teams if you are in a secondary school? How often are you fully aware of the Key Stage 2 curriculum? By doing a paper, you will quickly become familiar with the demands of the Key Stage 2 curriculum, and you will also know that in order to get a greater depth, what should a child need to do? What kind of content do they need to learn? In order to get an expected standard, what should they know? This would be a quick way to make staff aware that the demands on primary pupils are quite high as well. This would also help us to plan our curriculum and schemes of work in more depth. We will be able to evaluate them, we will be able to adjust them, and you can also think, where do I need to put more depth in and where I need to have less topics woven in year 7 and year 8. So are we actually changing and adapting our curriculum, looking at these collaborative meetings and jointly planning and delivering lessons? Are we building rich learning using STEM tasks and CETM tasks? If so, are we collaborating with each other or are we doing it in isolation? Because transition is about from one phase to another and the students stays the same but they are just going into a different setting. It's important that the sum of their experiences are actually built on what they already know. So collaboration is the key for a successful transition. Brickshaw is constantly looking for ways to build upon its successful transition policy, and this material is actually taken from NCETM, and I was really impressed with their systematic and organized transition at a trust level, and we do that as well in our trust. So what they did was they ran a project to make sure that the transition went really smoothly. So they were investigating that how stronger links can lead to improvement in the motivation, attitude of the teaching and learning of all the pupils and the staff who were involved. So the project included the following areas. So what they did was they planned a series of workshops for a key year 7 and year 6 tutors to develop teaching and learning practices. So that means they planned a series of lessons together, delivered together, looked at the schemes of work. Then they also planned year 6 maths competition. Teachers ran those competitions with the help of year 7 pupil mentors or maths leaders. And in our trust, we do that as well. We have got TT Rockstar in place. We have got some competitions and masterclass that we do with our secondary schools. A learning platform and a blog to increase communication in mathematical areas across schools is really important. If you are a standalone school, you could have your own VLE section or own standalone platform or a maths Padlet where you are sharing your ideas, good practices, anything that's going on in your department across both schools, or you could have a joint newsletter as well. And once they had this system put in place, then what they did was they monitored and reviewed. And in their review, in monitoring and reviewing, staff were very positive. From the first workshop, the staff said that they were actually really, really happy and they liked it, that it was actually very good experience for them to look at their own practice and what they need to do in order to improve their practice. And the cluster challenge was then set up in the next 3 weeks. So they had a clear timeline of steps. So that's another thing. So you meet and then you do one initiative, then have a timeline and plan the next step. And cluster challenge brought more collaboration with all the schools. It could be on a specific chosen area that you can plan together. And then the next meeting will focus on the teaching and learning in the hardest to teach topics, which the key stage will share, and then they will evaluate what does the greater depth look like in that topic and how do we deliver that topic. From my experience, this year, what we've done, we looked at question level analysis, and in our trust, we looked at the secondary schools, looked at it, and then primary schools also looked at it, and we chose the areas where pupils were struggling or not doing so well, and one of the areas was ratio and proportion. So what we did with the director of maths help, we got together and we put a day where all the heads of maths met with the maths teams, and we looked at different pedagogical approaches to teach ratio to pupils, and then we summarized it all. And afterwards, this was shared with all the schools in trust. And then we also set up the participation or collaborative pairs where feeder schools are going to a different secondary school or their feeder secondary school to deliver a lesson, to see them teach, to observe each other. So this collaboration is really important in order to have effective maths transition. And knowing makes us improve things better, and understanding is really important in order to put any new initiative in place. So collaboration is the key. Teachers also wanted to look at the ways that we can make the bridging units more fun and engaging. So when you are planning a transition, it is always a good idea to consult your feeder primary as well, and then plan jointly, because they know the children, they will be able to guide you, and you will be able to plan jointly together. We all do transition booklets, but how often do we actually consult lower schools to put the material together? And we can use secondary expertise and primary expertise together to build something really worthwhile for our pupils. Some other ideas that we could use is having Year 7 maths mentors to help develop students' links between Key Stage 2 and 3 maths. We can train them to teach some of the lessons, and these pupil leaders can go into a feeder primary schools and they can deliver that lesson. And Year 6 pupils will really like it, because it gives them a really rich experience of a pupil leadership, and some of them may be inspired to actually do that one day when they go to secondary school. And Cluster Challenge is the first initiative that teachers from schools across trust schools can set up easily. It aims to develop the teaching and learning and investigative approaches, and it also raises the profile of maths among school staff and parents equally. During this COVID period, we have been using online remote learning really effectively. So what we could do, we could use this remote learning once the COVID period finishes as well, because if you can't physically go from one school to another due to the traffic issues, or maybe geographically they are too far, we can use these remote meetings. So we can look at our scheme of work, we can look at the tasks and the games and other things that we can design together, and maybe we can cross-phase collaboration, and it could help us plan better for the coming years. How about creating a math transition Padlet, which will have games, tasks, and other starting points as well? And we can easily set it up among schools, or if you are a standalone school, you can still work with your feeder primary school to do it. Now, after this COVID period, it would make sense for us to make a list of the topics that have been covered in a primary school. So that list could be passed on to the secondary school, so the teachers are aware which topics were taught, and that would help with the smooth transition again. And then teaching approaches could be shared remotely to ease the transition process further. Now, key conversations need to be happening all the way through the year, and they need to be systematically built into our school calendar with proper timing and the cover of lessons. So what are those key conversations? Think about developing curricular transition packs. Are you consulting lower schools? Are you working with them in collaboration? Please don't do it in isolation. Work with them and then create it together, so we are building on pupils' existing knowledge into secondary schools. And how about moderating schemes of learning across phases along with pupils' work? So we have schemes of learning in place. When we look at children's work, that could give us really good idea how we can adapt our practices and amend our existing schemes of learning. How about having cross-phase intervention and enrichment plan together? It could be an investigation, it could be a competition, it could be a quiz, it could be a project that you are doing with the chosen pupils or across both schools. Teaching across schools is a really good practice that needs to be timetabled in. So staff from each school goes each term into primary and secondary feeder schools, so they are teaching and learning from each other. Jointly plan map schemes of learning and skills from year 6 to 7. Where are the pupils really good? What can we do in order to improve their skills even more? Mapping skills is a key area of the curriculum, and the curriculum leader and the maths team should really be thinking about this. Creating a map of new learning across all phases. So the pupil have done fractions, for example, in year 6. How can we actually build on their fractions knowledge, and we can improve their understanding better in a secondary phase? These are the kind of conversation that we need to do. How about making a standardization folder across phases, so we can put it on a Google Drive, or we can put it in a shared area where schools can access the folder where we are putting the samples of work. What does greater depth look like? What is expected standard pupil look like? So when we're talking about greater depth, we will have a little bit of idea of what actually greater depth looks like. And I think primary and secondary both will benefit from this approach. And similarly, a year 7 pupil who you think is working at a greater depth work can also be put in there. We can create these folders for each year group, so staff across primary and secondary school can look into those folders and improve their practices if needed. Having shared language and pedagogy for learning is really important. How do you teach mathematical vocabulary in a primary school, and how is that being taught in a secondary school? And what kind of similarities do we have in these two schools, and what kind of differences do we have? How do we build on from people's continuities? These are the crucial conversations that the subject coordinators and the staff needs to be having, and having a being aware of calculation policy is another area. How often do you review the calculation policy with the feeder schools? And if you have too many feeder schools, can you still get together and come to a conclusion how you can have a standardized calculation policy, so you know what you are expecting when children come to you from your feeder schools? Moreover, centralized system for organizing transition events is really important. So it will enable all the parties to access the information from one place. So any resources you have, any plans you have, or communication that could be logged in there. So if you were not present in that meeting, you can still access it. And this way you can regularly communicate your planning if you are teaching in each of the schools, and also your schemes of learning, etc. So the primary school staff have access to it. And if you are in a trust, it could easily be done. But if you are a standalone school, still with the good collaboration and key conversations, we can share these practices across schools. In my teaching career, I have used a range of ideas, which I'm going to share now. So, for example, during this COVID period, I have seen on internet and have taken part in several things. For example, several videos. For example, meet the department booklets, where the staff is presenting themselves imaginatively because they didn't have a fully arranged transition day, and it was a remotely arranged transition day. And video of a typical maths lesson, whether it's COVID period or not. This is a good idea where we are filming teachers teaching in a secondary school, and then that video could be played in a primary school. If your school doesn't have enough cover in place, or for some reason you cannot go and teach in a primary school, maybe this is not really a replacement, but it could help you to deliver that lesson. And so people can get a feel that what does year 7 pupil, what do they learn, and how do they learn, and what does it look like. And this practice is actually quite important for new staff as well, if they are dealing with transition as well. Bridging units is very important, and on Boland's website you will find lots of projects that you can actually liaise with your feeder schools and can do in collaboration, or other projects that you may have. A transition maths booklet is a very good idea. Many schools do it, but I have seen many schools do it in isolation rather than consulting with their secondary schools, talking to them what would they like in the transition booklet, because at the end of the day the children are going to a secondary school. Collaboration is must. So you must plan a bridging unit along with your feeder school and your secondary school in collaboration. And there are some really good examples of maths transition booklets online. And this website that I have listed on the slide also gives you a good range of activities for transition booklets. They are actually made by Lancashire Grade of Learning. School timetable and measurements could also be incorporated into maths transition. You can use school timetable to compile a list of questions and answer sheets about various lessons and timings. And you could have problem-solving questions there when children are reading the timetable and answering the questions. A very good idea for improving their measurement skills and practice the measurements, and especially reading timetables in real life scenario. Another activity that I usually have done is code breaking activity using teachers and staff members' names. So letters A to Z have a value. You can use decimals, you can use bigger numbers, smaller number, is up to you. So teachers then, each teacher's name is written down and each letter has a value. Children then work out which teacher is the most expensive, which teacher is the least expensive, by using 4 operations. You can design a treasure hunt on that, and it works really well. Children like it. Kahoot Quizzes and TT Rockstar is another really good idea for transition, and we can actually do this remotely once a term, so we have good links with our feeder schools, and Kahoot is really easy setup, so you can use the kahoot.com website to log children on, and then they can play with each other. And similarly, TT Rockstar, we had 3 competitions this year across trust schools, and they are so competitive and children are highly engaged in these sessions. Also, it helps them with their times tables too, which are needed in a primary and secondary in both schools. They're very inspired by these activities. There are a range of mathematical investigations which are available online on TES and also on internet. So there is one link here for you to investigate. Consecutive numbers, shapes, and there are loads of people are so generous, they have shared them openly, so they could be used in order to build pupils' existing skills in collaboration with your feeder schools. Numerise is another website which is free to download, and an account could be set up for children, and then they can be secondary ready. You can use the secondary ready section there, so they are actually revising and building onto their existing skills. I really like this resource, which has been compiled by MEI, and the website address is there, Calculator Crunch. Now, if you haven't taught in a primary school, you probably are not aware that calculators are not being used in primary school curriculum anymore. There used to be a Key Stage 2 SATs paper on calculator, but not anymore. So some schools don't really use calculators enough. So after SATs, this is a really good project on Calculator Crunch. They are highly effective task that has been designed, and the lesson plans are also available. So you could use these after SATs to prepare pupils with their calculation skills and with their revision skills, and also to improve their calculation skills using a calculator, and you can liaise with secondary schools accordingly. They are really good. I highly recommend these tasks. Another my favorite task is murder mysteries. From my experience, children absolutely love them, and you can adapt these murder mysteries. They are freely available online again. You can download them from TES. You can adapt them, change the character's name to teacher's name. So chef could be Mrs. Judge or artist could be Mr. Robson, if you have, or any other names. So the children do them in groups, and they really are inspired by these tasks. What I have done, I've given them as homework sometimes as well during transition, and they come up with a brilliant their own murder mystery which other people solve in the class, and they really like it. So this could be another linking project that you may want to investigate and do during transition activities. Escape rooms is another very highly challenging task. Children really like it, and there is a website which you can set up your escape room using the questions yourself. Open the Safe challenges are highly liked by children, and they are also available on tests and also online. And then if you have a safe in your classroom, you can put some sweets in there. When children finishes their task, they can get a little prize as well, and they are highly engaged, and it really encourages group work among them. These are my favorite investigations, code-breaking investigations. Here we are really teaching them how to actually solve real-life problems using maths, or how the mathematical application is coming in use in real life. So ISBN codes and credit card codes activities are really highly engaging, and it also teaches them that how the library uses a system based on the codes and the numbers. And similarly with the credit cards, how they can hack into, and how the combination works, and how would banks know somebody's hacking into account or not. Children find them really engaging. Again, these are freely available on tests as well. This activity is what is the most expensive teacher, as I described previously. Here, names of the staff members are written on a board. They're all given a value. People to find out who is the most expensive teacher, richest teacher, what are they worth. You can make anything out of it if you want. You can set up a treasure hunt based on the values if you want. Solid connections need to be built into our existing practices throughout the year seamlessly, rather than a one-off transition day to ensure a successful transition for all the parties. Having a one-day structured transition day with a booklet doesn't have much impact. The impact comes from collaborating with our schools, and I cannot emphasize enough on having collaborative practices in place, so there are solid connections between our primary school and secondary school staff, so they are sharing good practices and they are building on each other's expertise, so our pupils are benefited from them. It's really important to actually collaborate and work with our feeder primaries to make the transition smooth. It is a systematically process which needs to be built into a school calendar with leadership's help. Now, we can put all these systems in place, but how about monitoring and reviewing? How will we know that these systems are effective? So, have you thought about these things? Does your school complete a questionnaire on pupil thoughts and experience of transition during their first term? Do you also seek parents' opinion in order to illustrate the whole family's experience? It's really important. Have you explored the processes that support pupils' transition from primary to secondary school? Have you identified any of the hindrances, any of the obstacles to successful transition? Do you identify any background characteristics of pupils and families that are associated with more positive maths transitions? Do you evaluate and describe the specific practices that lead to a positive and negative transition? What can we do as educators to make their first transition experience in their maths lessons really engaging? And if they are used to seeing this collaborative practice, it obviously will aid into our teaching practice, and it will help them settle quicker in our secondary schools. In order to help us all, I have compiled a list of the resources here, which some of you may find it useful and some of you may already know it. Hopefully, you will explore some of these links and find somewhat useful. I hope you found this talk useful. Thank you very much for listening to me. And hopefully you will take one or two practices in your school regarding transition. Thank you.